I'm a native of Cortland, and I'm a native of Lincoln Ave, and I've lived there almost 69 years now. Um, One of the things that I want to talk about a little is when I was a little girl, we knew all the people on the street. Every house had family. No single people, all family, and family that had lived there a long time. Mrs. Lockwood lived next door to us, and I remember when Rosie and Norm Abdal moved across the creek from us. Now I think I've forgotten who used to live there, but those folks had lived there a long time too. And next door to them at 83 was Mr. and Mrs. Robinson. And their grandson and my sister Peggy and I were the only 3 children on the street for the longest time. I used to be able to tell you every single family that lived on Lincoln Ave. And my cousin, who was 87 when she died, she could tell you all the people that lived there before that. So, of course, we always knew everybody, and people watched out for us, and were very kind to us. And I would go sometimes with my grandmother when she'd go and visit somebody. And on the bad side of that whole thing, one time my sister and I thought we would be lovely to our grandmother, and we picked Mrs. Oh my gosh, can't think now. The lady 5 houses up the street, anyway. We picked her crocuses to take home a bouquet for my grandmother. And as I said, it was 5 houses up from where we lived. And by the time we got home, my grandmother already knew we had picked the flowers, and we were in big trouble. Now, of course, saying that, you know that she obviously called my grandmother. Well, when I was a child, we used to have, our phone number was 670J, and there was R and T and some other number I've forgotten. But anyway, it was a party line, so when you picked up the phone, you had to listen to see whether anybody was on there before you could make a phone call. So, needless to say, as children, we kind of listened in sometimes just to see what was going on. But there was just, as I said, my sister Peggy and I, and Sonny Robinson was the boy that lived up the street. It was his grandmother and grandfather lived at 83, and when he was called for supper, his grandfather would go out the back door and whistle, and he'd come because he could hear us. The creek is right next to Otter Creek is right next to our house, and we always enjoyed that because in the summertime, my sister and I would build a dam, and then rake all the rocks in a pile behind the dam, so we had a place to swim. When we were a little bit older, Rosie Abdallah called up and she said to my mother, "Tell the girls they've got to take the dam down because it's flooding my cellar." So of course we did, and we apologized all over the place. But anyway, as I said, everybody knew everybody, and when somebody in the family had something happen, people, if it was a sadness or if they needed help having company, people would bring food to their house. When somebody died, one of the neighbors would go around and take up a collection from all the other neighbors. And years ago, when someone died, they were buried from their house. There was before funeral homes, and the money that you gave to your neighbor was the thing that paid for the bouquet of flowers that was on the door that told that somebody had died. And as I said, everybody knew everybody, and they watched out for you, and that it's not like that at all anymore. We right now on Lincoln Ave we have less than 10 families. I think we only have 8. But you could walk. My mom walked to work. I can remember one time when I was a little kid, I ran crying down the street because she forgot to kiss me goodbye, and I got down as far as 61. And that's where Dr. Higgins and Mrs. Higgins lived. Not the Dr. Higgins now that lives in, well, I don't think he lives in Homer anymore. I think he lives out west someplace. But RP went to school with my oldest child. They were in kindergarten together. And but this, who I'm speaking of, is his grandfather. And the grandfather, when I was a child, right next to their property, they have their house, and another neighbor told me a few years ago that they didn't even have a basement with, it was just a place, they had the furnace, but they didn't have anything else in the cellar except the furnace and just a pathway through it. I was so amazed, I never had heard that before.
Where did your mother work?
My mother worked downtown.
Who did she work for?
She worked for, well, it's kind of hard to say. First of all, in the 1930s, she worked for Judge Kuhn in the courthouse. She was a legal my mother was a legal secretary, just an excellent secretary. She never wrote or typed out anything, whited out anything or anything like that, because she was such a perfectionist, she'd start over again. And when I did the historical information for the courthouse, I found her signature on a lot of papers. That pleased me very much. So she worked next door, upstairs, over a building called the Chocolate Shop, and that was on the corner of Main Street and Court Street, where the bank is now, where NBT Bank is now. And it was a great big restaurant. A lot of people went for breakfast there, and of course lunch and dinner, and it was run by a couple of gentlemen who were from Greece. And the people, they were related to the people that owned the community. And as I said, they called it the Chocolate Shop because they had the best chocolate sundaes you ever tasted, and milkshakes, besides all the wonderful sandwiches and all that. So it was very lovely. And they were always, I mean, you always were polite when you went in there. If you weren't polite, boy, you would be asked to leave. But anyway, my mother worked upstairs over that, and over Fishman's store was right next to it too. That was like a 5 and dime, and so she worked upstairs. And when I had to go to the doctor or something, I'd have to go down to her office and wait for her until she got done work, and then we'd go to the doctor's. And or if we were going to do some special thing. And
where was the doctor's located?
Let me think. Dr. Shea was our doctor, I think, and he lived on North Main Street, 102, and he's the doctor that delivered my 5 children too. Getting back though to the neighborhood, I want to say a couple of things about that. During World War II, our neighbor Mrs. Lockwood, who lived at 77, her son John went off to war, and he got killed on Saipan. And in those days, the government would send you a letter saying it's your son or whoever got killed and wherever they were. And she was not home at the time, and so they left the letter with my grandmother, and she had to take it over to her. and I don't ever remember Mr. Lockwood. He probably was gone. I don't know. He must have been gone when I was young, but because I don't remember him at all. But I remember Johnny and Don, and I don't know whether any of Don's children are still alive or not. But the thing that's the most interesting about when you get older is you wonder what happened to different people. One of the things I wanted to say, and it left my mind, was when I was telling about running down the street to my mother's, after my mother. The Higginses had a big lot right next to their house, and they also had a log cabin, and in a really log cabin with a fireplace and no, nothing else there, but somebody apparently used it, probably the doctor used it for peace and quiet when he had to do some reading or something. But and that was there until it just rotted away, and the people that live there now are the Tollners, and Mr. and Mrs. Tollner has lived there, oh my gosh, probably 30 or 40 years or more, and I think they're the ones that had it hauled away because it just rotted away and the roof fell in and all that. But it was always fun. I can remember one time sneaking in their backyard to look in the window so I could see what the log cabin looked like. The Higginses probably would have let me do that, but because you didn't pay any attention unless somebody came that you didn't know. But they were very nice, and people would invite you up on their porch and talk to you, and so you knew everybody, and that was the lovely place, the lovely thing about our street. I mean, we had people the father was a bank president, a couple of bank presidents, a plumber, trying to think of what else, electrician. There was a lady that lived by the lane. I didn't tell you about the lane. About 3 houses down from where I lived at 79. There's a lane that went up from Lincoln Ave to Graham Ave, and on that property right now doesn't belong to anybody, although there are people that use it. But when I was a child, that was a cinder road, and there was 3 houses on there. And the people, we knew them, and it's gone and it's all paved over now, but there was at one time the treat shop. Mr. McKendrick owned that and ran that, and over in back of where I lived at 79 was Mrs. Lockwood. No, I'm sorry, Mrs. Twentyman lived in back of us. And Mrs. Twentyman was Jim Nichols' grandmother. And she also had sisters, and Mrs. Twentyman came over first from Ireland, and she and her husband bought their house. And right next to that, her sister came, and Mrs. Reagan, and she bought that house. And right next to that, Mrs. Burns came from Ireland, and they bought that house. And they were all sisters. And then next to Mrs. Burns was the treat shop. But people walked over, and there were a few stores on Groton Ave. Mr. Brown, Tom Brown, lived at 50 Lincoln Ave, and he owned a grocery store right there across from Mrs. Twentyman's house. So it was easy to get to. If you lived on Lincoln Ave, we had a path that went by up our driveway, and then beside the garage and up through between Mrs. Twentyman's and Mrs. Reagan's property, and you could go right over to Groton Ave. So it was very nice, and as long as everybody behaved themselves, nobody gave anybody a hard time. except that when Peggy and Sonny Robinson, I know neither one of them will appreciate my telling you this, but the three of us, if we were mad at you and some kids came down our street, we wouldn't let them go past our house, or we'd make them go back and go up around either down Groton Ave or down Maple Ave. My sister always was embarrassed because of how we were when we were kids, and Mrs. Meldrum lived up the street from us in the house next to where Robinsons lived at 83. She lived at 85. Well, that's a double house, 85, 87, and she lived there. And then, as I said, the Bennetts lived next door to them, and then I cannot remember what the lady's name where we picked the crocuses, but her husband did roofing, and he lived to be in his 90s, and he put a new roof on a house I later on owned over on Madison Street. And next to him was Mr. Cooper, who was the agent down at the ticket man down at the railroad station. And I've forgotten now who the lady was that lived on the corner. Right now there's 3 great big houses that Mr. Reeners built there, and he tore down the houses. The house on the corner ended up, there was a nice, lovely China man and his wife from China, and they were always lovely, and he would sit on a bucket and pick the dandelions out of his lawn because he didn't like the dandelions, and his wife worked at Cornell, and they were friends with my daughter Mary, and they always asked about her. Mm-hmm. And as I said, we knew everybody on the street and even streets over.
Did you walk to school?
Yes.
Where did you go to school?
I went to St. Mary's School, and both my sister and I graduated from there, and we walked to school. And I think I need to say this for posterity, because I told St. Mary's Church when she died, I gave the eulogy, and I said to them, you all think my sister was such a lovely lady, and she taught school over in Groton for 38 years, by the way. But when we were kids, if she got mad at me, she'd say to me, "I'm not walking to school with you unless you give me a nickel." So I told that story, and I sort of got a laugh at church when she passed. But and the other thing she used to do, and she was just meticulous. I mean, you could, if you got up in the night to go to the bathroom, you might be afraid your bed would be made when you got back there, because she was so fussy about cleaning the house. But she used to, when my mother would mop the kitchen floor, she'd want to play in the mop water, and she said, my mother wouldn't let her, of course, and she said, "When I grow up, I'm going to be a mop lady, and I'll have my own mop and pail." Well, she was a teacher, so it shows you.
You probably, did you live in the neighborhood when Wickwire Pool was built?
Oh, I remember, I was in high school when Wickwire Pool was spoken about the first time. So we asked where it was going to be, and some friends of mine, we rode our bike up to where the church is on Homer Ave now, between Madison and Alvena. No, Van Hoosen, that's right. It was a field, and it was a farm field. There were cows in the field, and they said, "Well, we're going to have a pool there," and they built it, and it was wonderful. When we were all in high school, we used to go over there and spend the days and their afternoons, and swim and meet our friends and all that. That was a wonderful thing too.
At high school, did you go to the 60 Central Ave? Was that the high school then?
No, I went to St. Mary's had high school.
Right.
Yes, they had high school too.
What class were you in St. Mary's?
I graduated in 1950. My sister graduated 2 years before me. I need to let you know that for folks my age that went to public school, they remember they had big classes with sometimes over 100 or 200 kids. At St. Mary's, the whole 4 years that I was there, we had between 86 and 92 kids in the whole high school. So you were friends very often with people in a younger grade than you and in an older grade. And we used to have parties with people when I was in 10th grade. My husband was only in 9th grade and my sister was in 12th grade then, and I had friends that were in 11th grade. So we palled around, and some of those folks were Tippy Fuller and Nick Pauldine and Ed and Dick Shea and Ted Hoffman. Not so much Ted, but Dick Shea and a whole. Well, as I said, we all knew everybody, and we knew each other's kids, and
How did they have sports teams with a school that size?
well, that's an interesting thing because they had a hard time getting the kids together. And of course, boys are the only ones that played sports. Girls never played sports there. And we had a football team and a basketball team. And we were just a little school, and they never expected we were going to win, but we always thought we would, so we did. So they had some really good teams. And let me think. I can't say his name. The man that they're right next to St. Mary's School is a funeral home, and that funeral home, Martin, I think, Mr. Martin was the football coach. No, the basketball coach. He was the basketball coach, and Dick, when we were growing up, Dick Shea was the basketball coach then. And I remember in the 1940s, Dick's father had gone to England he was a doctor, as I said, and he went to England to work during the war, and he came when we were in high school to tell us about his adventures there, I guess we'd say, because of course they were being bombed and all that kind of thing, and people in England were happy to see the Americans. They were more happy at first than they were after they lived there a while, but the soldiers used to say to the people, they had great big dirigible balloons that floated over the city in London, and the soldiers said, well, they have those to keep London from sinking into the ocean, and the people were not very happy about it. Oh my gosh, it was.
You had told me a little bit about some of the changes downtown, like when they were building buildings downtown, what it would look like, how the construction sites were.
Oh yes, and one of the things they used to do is they'd put a big wooden plank board around where the front of where they were building, but they drill holes so if you wanted to look, you could look. And when my grandmother and I went downtown, we often peeked in the hole to see what they were doing. That's why when I see something being built now, I say, well, what is happening here, and what are you doing, and why, and what's going to be here? So.
Do you remember any of the buildings that were
all
being
we
built?
had on Main Street, of course, the community was there forever. And when my sister was a high school student, she worked in Fanny Farmers, which was right on the corner. There's an ice cream place there now, right a couple of places down from the community. And on the other corner, there were stores, and then they had Grant's, Woolworths, and Kresge's.
And you worked at Kresge's, you said?
Yes, for one day. I was my very first job, and I worked in Kresge's, and they had me down in the basement pushing these tickets that told how much the garment was for how much it was going to cost people. And I did that the whole day. Nobody ever came and said anything to me until 5 o'clock, and I got through at 5 o'clock, and I had such a headache, and I was so upset about that job, and I've forgotten whether I've said I got paid 37 cents an hour.
No lunch? Did you take
Well,
lunch?
I must have had lunch. I probably brought it.
Yeah.
But when I got all done, I had such a headache. I said to my mother, "I'm never going to work there again," and I never went back. So.
Where did you work after that?
Oh, well, that was my very first job, and then always I had some kind of a job someplace. Sometimes I babysat a lot. In fact, my claim to fame for working was I used to babysit a lot, and I babysat the Niederhofer kids when Beth only had 2 children, Gary and Carol. They're the 2 oldest Niederhofer kids, and they had 12 kids, who some of them went to school with my own children at St. Mary's. And one of the boys, I've forgotten now which one, but they bought a old hearse, and they would drive the hearse to school and leave the keys in it, and sometimes when they come out of school, the car would be gone, and then after a while, the car would come back, and one of their friends had help themselves to it. But, and I didn't even say this, there used to be on North Main Street, the State Theater. That was the movie theater. And next to them was the Harris's ice cream store, and they made their own taffy and all that stuff, which was wonderful. And next door to that was the Western Union, and next door to that was Doc Fran's paper place, and you could get ice cream there too. And next door to the Cortland Savings Bank was Van's Drugstore, and you could get a hot fudge sundae in there for 15 cents.
It's a lot of ice cream everywhere.
Yes, it was wonderful. And I remember when during World War II, if you brought in old car license plates, they would give you a free ice cream cone, and they collected all that for the war effort. Mm-hmm. They did lots of different things like that. Up over where's the Harris's ice cream place was WKRT when it first started, and Mary Ann Kane, who was the county historian now, she had a radio show. And she told, I remember once I went and made some kind of a presentation. I don't remember what it was about, but I do remember that I went there. And I was the one that was the editor or the announcer that day. And she was always very kind, and we always enjoyed doing a lot of things together. People who know me know that I always have something to say about something I'm unhappy about, and so I should probably tell you that I once complained about a movie that they had. By this time I was grown up and had children, and I complained about a double feature that they had at the State Theater because one was a kind of a kids movie, and the other one, in the other picture, it was not a gangster movie, but similar to that, and somebody killed this man and rolled him up in a rug, and I said I didn't think that was the thing that they should show when kids are going to see the other movie. So I complained to the owner, and he was very rude, and so when I spoke about it in the newspaper or to somebody, I forgot now which, I said, and Mr. Anthony was so wonderful, and I told that he was very agreeable that probably it wasn't a good thing to have that, and so on. But
so you've spoken your mind for a long
I
time.
always, yes, and I have to laugh because when I was before I got to junior high, I was really quiet, and when I say that, people burst out laughing because they can't believe it. You can't be that you were quiet.
What
but,
happened?
But I don't know. I can remember hollering at my whole class once because we were supposed to be hurrying up to do something, and they were fooling around, and I said, "Did you remember Sister said we gotta get this done in a few minutes, and you better get on your horse here and do what you're supposed to do." So I hollered at the whole class. And I always remember being so surprised that I did that because I didn't usually say much of anything. I don't know. But
And they listened to you, probably.
yes, they did. Amazingly, that probably it's all those kids' fault that because they listened to me. I could see I had power.
The rest is
I
history.
don't know. I know. Oh my goodness. But
What about other changes you've seen in Cortland? You mentioned your neighborhood changed.
Yes.
What else has changed?
well, I think, of course, I don't remember ever going and complaining to anybody, except one time when I had my son's bicycle was stolen, and I called up the police and I said to them, I wondered if I could go down to where they keep the bikes that they pick up that have been stolen, and the officer was very rude to me, and I was so angry about it that I hung up from him, and I called Mr. Furcucci. He was the mayor at the time, and about 3 minutes after I hung up from Mr. Furcucci, this officer called me back and wanted to know could he come and get me and take me down there. I said no, I just want to go and see if my son's bike is there. And I don't remember now what happened. The bike wasn't there, so.
But you got results right away.
But yes, absolutely. And
you've probably seen quite a few mayors come and go.
Oh yes, oh yes. And my cousin Ina, who lived with us almost all of her life, she was the secretary to 4 mayors, and she did all the other committees that needed a secretary, and she worked for them. She started out, I remember, when she was in high school, or when she graduated from high school, she worked for the election board for Bill Morgan. He was an awfully nice man. He lived in Homer, and he was the Democratic head
commissioner.
Commissioner, yes, commissioner. I hope that he'll roll over in his grave if he wasn't Democratic. But anyway, she worked for him. I've forgotten now who the Republican person was, but I can remember going to see her different times, and she, as I said, she worked for not only for the mayor and for the city clerk, but she worked any committees that had any groups that had to have a secretary. She went to and did that. So she always.
Where was the city hall?
City hall was right where it is now, except it was awful. It was. I don't know why they decided that they were going to put. In the front, you went in the middle of the building, and in the front they had on either sides gardens, and underneath, in a basement area, that's where the bathrooms were, of all things. And how anybody ever, it was just awful.
Had it been used for something else before?
No, I think it was specifically built for that. I can't say no. I don't. It wasn't, because I don't remember. But I only remember, and I think everybody in Cortland that lived at the same time and went to City Hall knew how terrible it was. It just smelled awful.
So the current City Hall was a step up from the old one.
Oh yes, but they still are not taking care of all the leaks in the ceiling and the roof and all that stuff. They're still
old.
Leaking.
And it's a flat roof. It's a pretty.
And it's amazing to me that anybody would build a flat roof in this area. Although I have to say, I was watching something on television this morning, and they were talking about Syracuse and this whole area. And when you think about all the things that are happening all over the country now, terrible fires, terrible tornadoes, terrible cyclones sometimes, when the I can't, what's the word, the storms that come off the ocean.
Oh, the hurricanes.
Hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
All those kind of things. We have snow.
Mm-hmm.
We're used to having snow. And that's another thing that's lovely about a neighborhood is everybody used to shovel their walk. And kids used to come, and when my kids were little, kids would come, and when I was little, we'd go to people's houses and knock on the door and ask them if they would give us $1 if we shoveled their walk. Mm-hmm. Well, nobody ever does that anymore, and the last time that I ever paid a kid to shovel it was $10. So, and nobody does that until you get old. Now I find I go out sometimes and my walk is shoveled and I don't know who did it. So I can't, and then I'm thinking, oh my, they must think I'm old. So,
is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I was trying to think of.
Are you talked out for this?
No,
episode?
I'm not talked out, and you know me, I'm never talked out. Now let me just look a minute here and see. Oh, I started to say, my own children, as I said, I've lived on Lincoln Ave almost 60 years now, 58 I think, and one of the things, I grew up at 79, and I ought to tell you this story about me too, because I don't want my sister to be up in heaven saying, well, she's telling all this stuff about me, but she's not telling about herself. When I first got a bike, and I'm not sure whether it was my bike that I did this with. I think it was the first bike I ever got. It was a smaller one of what I had later, which I still have, by the way, 74 years old. And I rode around our house as quick as I could, and somebody was chasing me, and I rode right across our lawn and rode right into the creek. And I thought my sister would fall over laughing, and she couldn't stop. She laughed so. And then, of course, I was annoyed because she laughed, but...
You mentioned something earlier to me about a tank trap?
Oh, yes. Oh, no, I won't tell that because Mrs. Dowd, Mr. and Mrs. Dowd lived across the street in Schwartz's house. I think that was their name. And later on, when those people passed, the minister... no, it wasn't Schwartz. It wasn't it wasn't their name. Schwartz was. I forgot now. But anyway, the minister that was the head man at the Lutheran church on the corner of Hamlin Street and Madison Street lived. He and his wife lived there. On one side, and the Hugheses, that's who it is. The Hugheses lived on the other side, and Dowds lived in the minister's side of the house when I was a kid, and then the minister's son was in the service, and he was my first big crush. He was in the Air Force, I think, and he was so handsome. I can still see him. But anyway, everybody on the street that didn't want to walk around the block or up through the lane to go to the store over on Groton Ave would come through our path, and we used to play out there. We had a summer house. My grandfather built a summer house, and we used to divide that off with blankets and sheets and make it into a house, and sometime I can remember later on when I was just around beginning to be a teenager, I used to take my books out there in a sandwich and several peanut butter sandwiches actually, and a drink, and I'd sit there all afternoon and read, and that was wonderful. By that time, my grandfather was still here, but my grandmother was gone already. She died when I was 10. And I have to tell you about my grandmother. One time I came home, she was a wonderful cook, and she was so kind to me. Anna White was her name, and she was a stay-at-home lady. I don't remember, if she worked, I never remember it. But anyway, she was a wonderful cook, and I came home from school one day, and I said, "Boy, something smells good here." She says, "There's an apple pie over on the windowsill cooling." And I went over to smell the apple pie and knocked it right out the window. Oh my gosh. And my grandmother didn't blink an eye. She said, "Don't worry, it's all right. I can always make another one." She probably was really upset, but she didn't seem to be.
Oh, that's
But
remarkable.
I mean, she was my dear. She was so good to me, and she's the one that minded me because my mom worked. And
Was she your mother's mother?
my mother's mother, yeah. I don't know. I never knew anybody from my grandfather's side until Aunt Tilly and Aunt Tessie were his sisters. And I think he had a brother, but the brother, I guess, went west, and they thought he was in San Francisco in 1906. So he was one of the people lost, they thought. And we never did find out. But he had his two sisters. One lived in Central Islip and on a big farm. And she and her husband owned the farm. I can remember going there, and it was wonderful. I was so surprised to see a big barn like that there, though. But then the other aunt was Aunt Tessie was my grandfather's whole family were corset designers, and they were all corset designers, and they came from England. My Aunt Tessie was a corset designer too, and she was a lady about 6 feet tall, and she had, at one point in time, she had a ladies' garment store on Fifth Ave in New York, and she had a catalog about this big, and she was the lady on the front in this very elegant dress. It was some of the pictures of some of the things that she had designed. So
What did your father do for a living?
my father worked at Brewer Tichenor, and as a matter of fact, my husband's uncle was his boss. So, and they were the Lanigans, and they lived down on Hubbard Street until great grandpa died, and then they sold the house. And and then after a while, I can't think of what the company that's there now.
Well, Cooper Tools.
No, it's a
Or Brewer Tichenor?
no, on Hubbard Street.
Yeah.
They lived,
Yeah.
and there's a big building there now, and I can't think of what it had in it, but the house was torn down, but of course we have pictures. And then also in Cortland, in the early days around 1900s and to maybe 1920s or 30s, there was place down at the end of Elm Street, and you'd go over the bridge, and they up on the hill there on the side hill, they had a park, and families would go there and picnic every Sunday. And the Lanigans and the Brackets did that a lot, I guess. And
That was your maiden name?
no, that was my husband's grandmother.
Okay.
And the thing that's funny is my dad died my dad's mother died 2 days after he was born. And for some reason, we always knew the Lanigans, and Mrs. Lanigan was, Grandma Nora was very dear with my father. I don't know why. I know my dad worked, so it must be Uncle Francis took him over to his house at one time, a point in time or something. But my dad used to go after Mass on every Sunday and go and visit Nora until she passed. And
Well,
they had 9 children in their family, and so
I think we will wrap this
okay.
episode up. But
Okay.
we'll have to return.
Oh well,
Again.
you know me. I'm never at a loss for words, except that the ones I'm beginning to forget now. So.
Thank you.